Hey everyone. I'm seeing some people starting to turn up. Hey Chris. Hey Danny. Hey Annette. So we're going to spend a few minutes killing time to give people time to join. Hey Doug. Hey, we got Mario as well now. Hi Katja. Oh, thanks Graham. Yeah, we've got a nice kitchen. I'm on the patio furniture though, so we're still waiting for our furniture to arrive. I just moved to the Scottish Highlands in the midst of a pandemic, so we made it into the house just in time, but the furniture's all been left behind. Hey Shelley. Okay, we'll just give it another minute maybe, and then I'll start. Hey Lou, good to hear from you. And hi Mike. Oh, I think I missed off Sandra from Switzerland as well. Hey Sandra. So I think I can probably start now. I think we've got a lot of people watching. Oh, hey Anya. So for those of you who I don't know yet, my name's Alex Cowan. I've worked in polar tourism for almost 10 years now. I started as geology lecturer, but for most of that time I've worked as expedition leader. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about working in the polar bear environment. So I've worked mostly in Svalbard, probably like most of you watching and listening. I've also worked in East Greenland and in France, Josephland. I've also done a climbing expedition to East Greenland as well, so that was a long time ago. But I have some experience in the Arctic outside of the tourism world. Hey Colby and Helen. Let's see. So first of all, just wanted to say thank you to PTGA for creating this series. It's been really good to learn so much, but also get to see and hear from people who I've never met before. Also to say thanks to the speakers for actually agreeing to take part and to do this for us. Hey, Dean. So in this short talk, what I want to talk about is strategies that we can use when working in polar bear environment. Hey, Heidi. So, it's not so much about the tactics of directly managing a group, but it's the strategies, the types of operations we might choose to run. So this is sort of aimed a little bit at expedition leaders to some degree, deciding how to run an operation or whether we should be running an operation in somewhere like Svalbard. And a lot of this is going to be very Svalbard specific, largely because that's where most of my experience is, but also because I think that's where most of our experiences are. I know a lot of us also work in the Canadian Arctic. I've never worked there and would really love to. There's something amazing about the romance of the history of the Canadian Arctic and the native culture there as well. But I haven't worked there yet. So there's a lot of the examples I'll be using will be from Svalbard. So first of all, I just want to say a few words on analysis of risk. So before I go out anywhere, whether that's in the Arctic or Antarctic, before I set out, I imagine myself coming back to the ship having had a serious incident. And then I think about how my peers would perceive that incident. I imagine what conversations people would have with each other when they're discussing what has happened to me. And what I would hope people would say would be, wow, that sounds really unlucky, that could happen to any of us, and not, wow, that was a pretty poor decision to have made. It's kind of not surprising that an incident occurred. So the difference between those might be heading out at St. Andrews on a flat, calm day when the forecast is for no wind all day. It's a little bit overcast, there isn't bright sunshine, but then a massive katabatic blows up. I mean, that's something that could probably happen to any of us. But heading out at St. Andrews in 30 knots of wind, occasionally gusting to 45, and then it blows up and someone gets hurt. Well, if you heard that story, you'd say, well, that wasn't a very sensible thing to do. I also think about how my actions might be described in a court of law as well. So particularly if there's an expert who's asked to talk about the decisions I made who maybe doesn't even work in our industry. So I'm always thinking about how my actions might be perceived after the fact. And so I also do this if I imagine coming back to the ship where a bear has been hurt or we've had a negative interaction with a bear on shore. Have I made decisions that might have led to that? Or have all my decisions been good ones that have tried to avoid there being any kind of interaction? So when every time we go out, we take risks, and we can disclose those risks to our guests. So we can say, there's a risk to going out in a Zodiac. There's a risk to walking around on rough terrain or on ice. And the guests can accept those risks. But we're also creating risks for bears as well. And the bears can't accept those risks. We can't disclose them. The bears can't accept them. And so I think that puts even more of an imperative on us to reduce that risk to the bears that we create by going ashore carrying firearms as much as possible. We all talk about what justifies us going to the Arctic and Antarctic is we're creating ambassadors. So we're educating people and we want to make them really excited about the Arctic and the Antarctic. I want to protect those places. But I just was watching Tiger King on Netflix, and Doc Antle and Joe Exotic say that exact thing to justify keeping tigers. So there's a line there between what's acceptable in pursuit of creating ambassadors and what's unacceptable. And hurting a bear is probably on the unacceptable side of creating ambassadors. So I like to try to plan every operation as though I don't have a firearm. So how can I run an operation in Svalbard as though I don't have a firearm? So obviously the main way to avoid any risk to guests is to not leave the ship. And so in this talk, I'm going to assume that we're going to leave the ship. And the best way to avoid any risk to bears is we don't take a firearm. And I'm not going to talk about that either. I'm going to assume we're going ashore with a firearm, but planning an operation as though we aren't going to use it. I'm doing this because we work in Svalbard, Greenland, Franz Josef Land, where we have to carry a firearm. And I know in some places of the world, people don't carry firearms in polar bear country. And I am fascinated by that process. And I know some people in our industry think that's a good thing. And I think they might be right. I think we might make smarter decisions by not carrying a firearm than we might do carrying a firearm. Anyway, I'm going to go into this now. And I'm going to go through 3 different strategies for managing a landing in polar bear country. And probably all of you will have used all of these strategies before. So what I hope people might get from this is if you are inexperienced in polar bear country, you might learn something. And if you are very experienced like me, maybe it might at least help you to think a little bit more about why we choose to do the things we do. So if you have any questions, please put them down as soon as you think of them in the comments. And then I'll get to those as soon as I finish talking. So it'd be great if there are some questions to go out or any comments you have as well. And I see a hello from Ryan and Ida there as well. Hey guys. So the 3 strategies I'm going to go through are, first of all, immediate escape. So this is our gold standard strategy, the lowest risk for bears that we use in the highest risk situation. So immediate escape is the first one. The second one is using guided groups. So that's the next level in terms of, it's higher risk, but it's sort of the mid-level. And then the last one is using perimeters. So you've got a perimeter with all your guests wandering around freely inside it. So I think that's the highest risk situation, or the highest risk strategy to use in the lowest risk situation. So we're going to look at immediate escape, guided groups, and perimeters. So let's start with immediate escape. So the idea of this is that you have enough boats nearby for everyone who's on shore to leave immediately should a bear turn up. So a bear turns up, in a few minutes, you're all gone. And we're assuming that once you're out in a zodiac, you are safe and the bears are safe. So small ships, by which I mean the ones carrying 12 or fewer passengers, are using this to some degree all the time. So they operate differently to the larger ships, which I've done most of my work on. I've also worked on the small ships. These small ships quite often have enough boats on shore all the time that they can just run to those boats, get in and leave very quickly. But this can be done on larger ships as well. So I've drawn a map here for you all. I'm going to try and get this lined up with the, here we are. So this map is of an island in Svalbard, or part of an island in Svalbard called Kvitøya. And this is Andre Neset, which is at the western end of Kvitøya. And so for those of you who don't know Kvitøya, Andre Neset, so Kvitøya is at the northeastern edge of the Svalbard archipelago. It's an island that's mostly covered in ice, but with a narrow beach at each end. The western end is Andre Neset. It's known for often being foggy, for being quite exposed to wind and waves, so it can be rough on the beach. And in particular, it's known for there being a lot of polar bears there. But there's also a very, very strong historical interest there. This is where the Andre expedition members all died. And so for historians, this is a real holy grail site. So in this map here, so this is the shoreline. So we've got the sea just here. This is the beach, and then we can see the ice cap up behind the beach. And then this object here, this is the plinth at the campsite. So to set the scene, a few years ago, we had a group who are almost all Norwegians traveling with us, and they came with us every year. So most of this group had lived in Longyearbyen at some time, and every year they would come and travel with us to come back to Svalbard and to see the parts of Svalbard that they didn't get to see when they were living in Longyearbyen. And a lot of them were also very, very interested in history, and Andre Neset was their real holy grail site. Every year they came, they wanted to go to Andre Neset. So every year we'd try, and every year we'd fail because it was foggy, or it was too windy, or most of the time there were too many bears. So on this particular day, we went out in the morning to scout, and we went down to the campsite area. We had beautiful conditions, so no wind. We had clear blue skies, no fog at all. The forecast was for the conditions to continue to be great throughout the day, so we weren't expecting the winds to come up and potentially trap us on shore. So everything looked great, except there was a bear there. So that's what I've got drawn up here. So this is a polar bear asleep around 2 miles from the landing site. So I thought to myself, so, well, we could kind of do this. Like, we could land and leave again. That bear may never wake up. But then those voices in my head said, okay, let's imagine you end up killing a bear. How is this story going to be told later? People are going to say, did you hear about Alex Cowan? He went to Andre Neset, there was a bear there, he landed anyway, they killed the bear. It's totally unacceptable. You can't do something like that. So what did we do? Well, we did manage a landing. So how do we do it? Well, we used the immediate escape strategy, and we used a lot of scouts. So we can see here, we've got 4 Zodiacs pulled up on shore. So we landed 30 guests at a time. So we had 30 guests. They were only allowed to be at the monument. The drivers for these boats kept the boats pulled up on shore all the time. So the driver was there with the boat, ready to drive immediately. We had a 4th boat ready to pull off all the staff from shore as well. And we can see here we've got some staff scattered around, and they was all placed at high positions where they could see as far as possible. So if a bear that we hadn't found on the pre-scout raised its head, they'd see it from as far away as possible, and we'd know to leave. We see down here a Zodiac Scout. So this is something we always use on the bigger ships. So you've got one boat, has no guests in it, it's just a staff member. On this particular day, it was Chris, who I think is listening at the moment, and they are just driving up and down the coast, trying to see as far as they can, with the intention that if a bear shows up, you find out about it a really long time in advance. So if there's a bear 3 miles away walking towards you, you have lots of time to make a decision about leaving. We also had an additional Zodiac Scout that was static and dedicated just to the sleeping bear. And the decision was, if that bear woke up and started moving towards us at any speed, we would immediately cancel the landing and be gone. So I felt really confident with this operation that we would never need to use a firearm. So if that bear woke up and started to walk towards us, in just a few minutes, we'd have all the guests in the Zodiacs and gone. If a bear turned up from somewhere else, all the guests are in the Zodiacs are gone. If we find a bear swimming ashore, all the guests are in the Zodiacs and gone very, very quickly. So that's what made this appropriate for us. Of course, this required carefully briefing the guests on this. They all understood there was a bear close by. To them, 10, 15 minutes at the campsite was well worth the day. For them, they were so excited about getting to touch this land. We had people kissing the beach as they landed. So 10 or 15 minutes to them was absolutely fine. And they understood that if that bear started moving, we would all be leaving immediately. So that's how we managed that and how I justified it in my mind. So that's the immediate escape strategy. So the next strategy I want to talk about is guided groups. So in this map, what I've got is Magdalena Fjord, who I'm sure lots of you know. For those of you who don't, Magdalena Fjord is in the northwest of Svalbard. It's an extremely popular place to make a landing and go for a little walk. So we can see up here, we've got Gravneset. We can see the graves just here. This is Gully Bukta, which is a long, narrow fjord just to the west of Gravneset. There's a nice glacier at the bottom. You often get walrus hauled out just here on this spit. Now, it's very common to do a perimeter system here. So you allow the guests to wander freely up in this area here. And this particular day, for several reasons, chief amongst which is maybe just luck, I decided I didn't want to do a perimeter, but I wanted to do guided groups. So what we did is we landed 60 people on shore. We landed them here where this number 1 is. So we landed 60 people and we split them into 2 groups of 30. And each of those groups was going to remain as a discrete group. So they'd be led separately, they wouldn't be mixing with each other. And the intention was they would walk across the landing site area, they'd pass a person right here. So this is a sentry we have set up. So we use this at a lot of our landings as well, is one person who's not interacting with guests. They're in a position where they can see as much as possible, and they're just looking all the time. And again, the intention is they're trying to find an approaching bear from as far away as possible so that we have as much time as possible to deal with that situation. So our 2 groups of 30 then walked down the coast of Gully Bukta, and as they got close to the glacier, they would meet 6 boats carrying another 60 guests. So they'd been out Zodiac cruising, visiting the walrus, visiting the glacier, and we'd swap them over here. So then the 60 who have been walking in their 2 separate groups then go on a Zodiac cruise. The 60 who've been cruising now start walking back again in 2 separate discrete groups. Once again, we have a Zodiac Scout available. So our Zodiac cruisers are out cruising, but we have a separate boat. All it has is a staff member in it, and the intention is they're looking at the places that the sentry and the Zodiac cruisers can't see. So they're driving around the corner, seeing several miles up the coastline. They're checking out the opposite side of Magdalena Fjord. They're going around to the far side of the landing site and looking all the time. So again, this was Chris. So hey again, Chris. So what happened in this particular situation? So now we're zoomed in on Magdalena, on Gravneset. So here's the spit, here's the grave site just here. We've got the ship anchored over here. And this is towards the end of the landing. And our second set of groups have walked north and they've arrived at the landing site area. And as they're starting to come up towards the landing site area, we get a call from the ship that there's two polar bears, a mother and cub, who've come out of the water. So we're not exactly sure where this is. So straight away, Chris drives round as fast as he can in the Scout Zodiac to where the ship is to find out where they are. And we've established the bears are directly south of the ship and they're traveling towards the landing site. So we and the bears are walking towards each other. So this is another reason why the Scout Zodiac is so important. You've got someone who's able to go and work out what's going on. So it's also worth mentioning here that when you're working in polar bear country, there's often too much for you to do and think about as an expedition leader on your own. And it's really important to create leadership opportunities in your team, to have people who can help you to handle these situations. So in this case, I was leading Group B. So I never saw these bears until the end of this incident. So instead, Chris was helping to manage this whole evacuation process and work out what we had to do. So having him there and other people I trusted to make decisions for me was really, really important. And so at this particular company with G, we have a chief scout role as well as a firearms master. So these are all people who can take charge of the team and manage a situation and manage groups. So as soon as Chris established that these bears were here, being that Scout Zodiac position, he attempted to stop them from traveling towards us. So essentially by driving ahead of them. For those of you who don't know Magdalena Fjord and Gravneset, there's a steep slope coming up here. It's a relatively narrow beach area. So he was attempting to stop them and drive them back by basically shouting, making a lot of noise, or at least slow them down. But they were on a mission. They were coming regardless. So we had our 6 boats out with Zodiac cruisers, of course. They went straight back to the ship to drop everybody off so that we'd have 6 empty boats. Group A just here, they were pretty close to the planned landing site, which is close to the ship. So they just kept moving. We had some challenges here with this operation, one of which was communication. Some of the Zodiac cruisers, it wasn't clear to them where they were needed. And in them asking that a lot on the radio, it got in the way of other more important communication. So that was an important learning point that we got from this incident. Another was, in Group A, we had some guests of a different nationality who didn't share, not all of them shared a language with the guides, and they didn't fully appreciate the urgency of the situation until they saw the bears. And so there was some difficulty there in moving those guests along quickly enough. Anyway, these 30 people and the staff leading that group got to the pickup site just as 3 Zodiacs arrived from the ship. They picked those up and took them away. It became clear with Group B, we would never make it there before the bears. So we stopped earlier and we created effectively a defensive position, an area we were going to stick it out in around on the other side of the landing site, and the other 3 Zodiacs came around and picked us up from there. So what are the learning points from this situation? Well, first of all, it's that Zodiac cruise boats are not scout boats. So they were all down at Gullybuckter, in Gullybreen in Gullybuckter. So they were never going to be looking really for bears. You can ask the Zodiac cruisers to help with scouting, to be on the lookout, but they're not in the same position as the Scout Zodiac, which is deliberately driving everywhere all the time, looking at everything. The other learning point from this is just seeing how strong the guided group system is. If we'd had people in a perimeter here, it would have taken us much longer to organize this. Can you imagine trying to split, get the guests on this side to go to this landing site, but maybe the guests on this side to come to this landing site, especially with the language barrier. We were fortunate in this case that we could get the Zodiacs to the landing sites in time to be away before those bears appeared. So the very last person was stepping offshore just as these bears became visible several hundred meters away. But if we hadn't had the zodiacs there, still this system is better than the perimeter system because we had control over that little group of people. They understood they had to stay together, and we could have moved them out of the path of the bears. So what we learned was these bears were on a mission. They just wanted to go somewhere. They wanted to cross over here, get to this shoreline, and walk down it. So simply by moving up here, we put ourselves out of the path of the bears, and that was much easier with guided groups than it would have been with a perimeter. Okay, so that's the guided group system. So the last strategy I want to talk about now is perimeters, because we just mentioned them just then. So here's an example perimeter. So this one here is Smeerenberg, also in the northwest of Svalbard. So here's Amsterdam Oya up here. Here's Danskoya. This is Danske Gattet in here, and this is Smeerenberg itself on this point. So there's a little walrus hall out here, an interesting historical site as well for whaling, and we can see the ship's anchorage just here. And we can see here a group of people scattered around defining a perimeter, and I've drawn a dotted line here to indicate an imaginary perimeter. So the intention with the perimeter is you have an area in which the guests are wandering around freely. So that's what's nice about a perimeter, is guests can move at their own pace without being dragged around by a guide all the time. Also allows the guides to take a few minutes to themselves and not have to be talking to the guests all the time. So take a little bit of a mental break. But perimeters come with a lot of challenges. So I think they are probably the weakest of these strategies and should be used with some caution. So what are some things to think about when we're doing a perimeter? Well, first of all, these people around the outside of the perimeter defining it, what is their role? Because they're often used as guides to talk to people. But if you're talking to someone, you're not looking for bears. And if there's one thing we should remember about perimeters, is it's the strategy that requires the greatest warning. So if you've got immediate escape as your strategy, then you don't need much warning to get away before a bear arrives. So you just need a few minutes and you're gone. With guided groups, you need more warning, but again, not as much as with the perimeter, because you've already got people gathered and under control. You've got to get people gathered and under control before you can do anything with a perimeter. So all these people need to be looking outwards all the time. So again, think, are your guides looking out or looking in? Because I've often seen perimeters where the guards are all around the outside looking in at the guests, and a bear will never teleport to inside the perimeter. You've got to be looking out and trying to get as much warning as possible. And this is a very active role. They've got to be looking out, thinking about where they can see and where they can't see, and communicating with each other. So if this guide can't see something, he's asking this guide, can you see it? And if neither of them can see it, they're talking to the Zodiac Scout. The Zodiac Scout is even more important with a perimeter to get this long-term warning that a bear is on its way. So you're finding out when that bear is several miles away and on its way towards you, to get those guests gathered into groups, organized, and hopefully off the beach and into Zodiacs. And again, this is a time when it's very important to have a chief scout, a firearms master, people with leadership qualities who've had power delegated to them to be able to run things while you as the expedition leader are maybe down on the beach loading and unloading boats and giving briefings. So your chief scout can be somewhere, say, in a high position where they can see a long way, but also they can see all of the other guards as well, and can coordinate everyone for you. And if there is an incident, you've got to start gathering the guests in, then they can coordinate that for you as well, while you are maybe trying to load boats quite quickly. The other thing you always need to be thinking about with whatever situation you're doing, whichever strategy you're choosing, but especially with the perimeter system, is where are you most vulnerable? So in this case, probably where we were most vulnerable is from the sea. And that's the case in most landing sites, I think, is you're most vulnerable from the sea. But nonetheless, you sometimes see people treat the beach as a barrier, but it's not a barrier, it's a wide open gate. So in this particular situation, we're landing people on the tip of Smeerenberg. They're wandering in a perimeter, and we're taking small groups to go and see the walrus hold out there. And then we see a few hundred meters out to the south, a bear swimming towards us. So this bear is swimming towards us, appears to have an intention to land with us at the landing site. So we use the Zodiac Scout to encourage that bear out across Smeerenberg Fjord. Now, obviously, it's not ideal to be out there effectively intimidating a bear away from us with a Zodiac. We don't want to be out doing something like that, and we never would have started that operation if we thought we'd have to do that. But in this case, there was a better thing to do than to allow that bear to land with us and potentially have to deal with it in a different way. So again, the Zodiac Scout, super important to be available for that. But also we need to learn that the shoreline is a very, very vulnerable line for us. So I want to go and look now at another example of a perimeter just to show the vulnerabilities of the shoreline again. So this one is Nalodden in Hornsund, again in Svalbard. So this is down in the south, a really, really beautiful place, very, very popular. And it's quite common, in my experience here, to see people do perimeters here. But I'm not sure if a perimeter is a great idea here. So first of all, it's not that uncommon for there to be bears in Hornsund. So there you can see there's a hut drawn here. This hut was built here by Henry Rood for hunting polar bears because a lot of bears came through. So we can see it's quite a convoluted shoreline. So lots of ins and outs, these little bays, and this ground is really hummocky. So I've drawn a few boulders here as well. And I've drawn some guides defining again some imaginary perimeter. So these boulders can be quite problematic. So I've know at least 2 people who've been surprised by a sleeping polar bear while scouting here that has been hidden either behind a rock or up on a hillside in a gully. We can see up here a sentry. So this is a really steep slope up here capped with a vertical cliff. So this sentry is in a useful position in terms of being able to see a fairly long distance. But a bear is never going to come down that vertical cliff. A bear won't abseil down. So that sentry is only there as a pair of eyes. And so again, sometimes I see everyone wants to go and be a sentry because you can see a really long way. But that sentry in an actual incident is not very much help. They're only really holding a firearm as a personal defense weapon. They're not going to get involved. They're not going to come down and use their banger down here because they're too far away. But the issue with, in my mind, with Nalodden is, first of all, visibility. So with these boulders, it's hard for the guides to see all the guests inside the perimeter, sometimes even to see each other or to see very far. So over here, oops, I'm trying to bring this in. Here we are. So this is Bergebukta up here. So none of these people can see up into Bergebukta. So yet again, it's crucial to have that Zodiac Scout driving around into there regularly to look for bears so that if there's one coming, again, we have a lot of warning. But what's another thing that's very difficult with Nalodden is this convoluted shoreline and the fact that there's quite often a lot of brash ice here that comes out of Bergebukta. So if you have choppy conditions, so you have a few white caps, or you have a lot of ice in the water, a swimming bear can quite easily vanish into that. And I know this has happened to groups in the past that a bear has swum through brash ice into this bay and hasn't been seen until it's well into the bay. Now, if you have guides out on these points, by the time you find that bear, it's actually inside the perimeter and much too late to do anything about it. So you can't fire bangers, you can't use a firearm. It's too late by the time the bear's here, it's inside the perimeter. And so it's with guests very, very quickly. So that's why here, probably guided groups are better, because if that bear arrives, there's no perimeter for it to be inside or outside, and you can start moving those groups away from the bear, moving those groups to better positions in the hope that you can then deter that bear. So again, if this is like a real problem bear that really wants to come at you, then guided groups aren't necessarily going to be that much better for the bear than the perimeter, but they will be better for the guests, and nothing really is going to beat the immediate escape system. So I've talked a lot there about why perimeters are bad and where we shouldn't use them, but maybe there are places where we can use them and it's okay. So how should we think about perimeters in such a way that we can use them and they're okay? Because guests enjoy perimeters. So this landing site here is Skansbukta, again in Svalbard. So this is in Isfjord. This is a place where I'd say you less commonly see bears than places like Kvitøya, which is my first example, or Nalodden, which is the last one I just did. So here in Skansbukta, we can see, let's see, here's the ocean here, and we're landing in this bay. This is Skansbukta itself. There are steep cliffs up here above the landing site. It's really beautiful, and there's cliffs around here with puffins on them. At the head of the valley, of the bay, there's a really broad open valley. There's really good visibility here. So you can set up a little perimeter here around the mine workings, the railway line, the old hut there. People can wander around freely in there, and your guards in this perimeter have really good visibility. So you can see a really long way up this valley. So if a bear comes, you know about it a really long time in advance. Also, you can see this far side pretty well. There are some gullies up here which a bear could be hidden in, but if a bear came down, you would probably still have enough time to get these people organized, provided your perimeter was relatively small. What people like to do here is go around to see the puffins on the cliffs. So what I do when I do a landing here is I land half my guests in the perimeter here, and the other half are out looking at the puffins from the water. So again, you can use these cruise boats as scouts in this direction if you ask them to. So if you tell them you want them to go offshore and get a good look up the shoreline, then you can get some idea if a bear's coming in that direction. But again, you really need the scout zodiac to check down in this direction. But also this scout zodiac can effectively cut off the entrance to the bay for you. So if you have reasonably flat conditions such that a bear is visible, this scout zodiac can cut off the entrance to the bay and hopefully prevent a bear from entering. So this just reduces the vulnerability of your shoreline here. So I think Skansbukta is not such a bad place to run a perimeter compared to some others. So I'm going to finish now by talking very briefly about how you decide which of these strategies to go for. Do you go for immediate escape? Do you go for guided groups, or do you go for a perimeter? So the first thing I think about is, what is the likelihood of a bear? Because while we can have a bear anywhere in Svalbard, on Greenland, or Franz Josef Land, we know there are some places where we are surprised when we don't see one, we're not surprised when we do see one, or maybe we are a bit surprised when we see one. So places where I'm not at all surprised to see a bear is Kvitøya. That's somewhere I'd be very surprised if I didn't see one. So anywhere on the east or west of Kvitøya, Karl XII, the Seven Islands, Lagoya, these are all places I expect to see bears, and I would take that into account before managing a landing there. So, and there are some places where I feel less likely to see a bear. So Skansbukta is one of those. However, if anyone has had a bear at Skansbukta or had to do an evacuation there, I would love to hear it. I also would say that Magdalena Fjord is somewhere you're a little bit less likely to see a bear, but as we've just seen, I have an example there where I had to do an evacuation because 2 bears turned up. So please, I'd love it if people gave me ideas here in the comments of places where you really expect to see a bear, places you don't expect to see a bear, and best of all, places you don't expect to see a bear and you had to do an evacuation because of it. So first of all, there's the likelihood of a bear, but then I think, what is the consequence of a bear appearing? So what do I mean by the consequence of a bear appearing? So effectively, what's going to happen if that bear appears? So imagine we're in the middle of a big bare white plain, or let's call it a black plain, so that the bear shows up and we can see for 20 miles in all direction. Well, if a bear shows up, that's relatively low consequence because we'll see it 20 miles away. But if we had poor visibility, for example, we had fog, that's high consequence, because when the bear shows up, it's really close to us. So that's why we don't operate in fog. But maybe you could operate in very poor visibility if your guests never walked more than 1 meter from the zodiac, for example. Also, the landscape. So it's not just the visibility in terms of the atmosphere, but the landscape. So is the landscape preventing you from seeing a long way? So I see Doug Gould commenting on here. I have many fun memories working with Doug. And I think Doug and I once did a landing in Belsund with a group of geology students that was, if a bear had shown up, it would have probably been within 100 meters of it. So that is super high consequence. So after having done that operation, we vowed we'd never do that operation again, because if a bear showed up, there's very little we could have done about it unless the bear wanted to get away from us. Also think about the visibility on the water. So we already talked about ice in the water hiding a bear, and whitecaps as well. So anytime there's ice in the water, we're not just thinking about the possibility that it's going to trap us on shore, but also there might be a bear in it, because they make their living by sneaking around in the ice in the water. I see a great comment there from Neil Rabjohn. Nico Harbour, 10 out of 10, would not expect a bear. Yeah, that's pretty fair, Neil. Then also think about the ease of evacuation. So how many places do you have to evacuate from? We looked at the example of Magdalena Fjord. So we had a very easy secondary evacuation point available to us on the far side of the landing site. But let's imagine, say, we're landing on Phipsawyer next to the hut there, and we're going to see the walrus, and a bear turns up. There's actually, not too far away, alternative evacuation points. So particularly if you're doing guided walks, you could walk over to one of those other beaches. It wouldn't take you that long, but it would take a really long time for the Zodiac to drive around and pick you up. So maybe ease of evacuation there in terms of secondary pickup points isn't that great. So think about how easily you can get people off the shore from different places. And then you've got to think about the ease of group control. So how long is it going to take you to gather your group and get them off the beach? If they're already at the beach because you've got an immediate evacuation strategy in place, well, that's super easy. If you've got guided groups, that's quite easy. If you've got a perimeter, it's less easy. If your perimeter is massive, if you've got a perimeter 2 kilometers long, that's extremely difficult. So now the consequence of a bear turning up, however far away it is, if your perimeter is 2 kilometers long, that's a really high consequence occurring there. Or another example of the ease of group control is the characteristics of your group. So do your guides speak the same language as your guests? If they don't, well, this makes ease of group control harder. Are your guests as a group group that listen to you and follow instructions, or are they a group that tend to ignore you? If they're a group that tend to ignore you, then your ease of group control is low, and so maybe you should be considering a much smaller perimeter, or a guided group, or an immediate evacuation strategy, or you keep everyone in the Zodiacs, because of course, if you're out in Zodiacs, provided you're not trapped in ice, you are relatively safe from a bear. So yeah, also provided that you're not broken down either. So that's it for my talk. I'm going to have a look through some of the comments now to see if there are any questions or comments here. Let's see. So Chris, I think talking about the Magdalena Fjord evacuation, he says he didn't think it was a big problem with comms in terms of us talking to each other. We understood each other really well. But when other guides don't maybe realize what's going on and talking over the scout team. So yeah, that's a good point. Making sure everyone's on the same page, not just the guests, but your whole team, that there's something going on and letting people know what's expected of them. So letting the Zodiac cruisers know we need them to go back to the ship and be quiet until they're empty. Like that. Swimming bears, a blondie fur seal. From Arjun Drost, I had a bear there right at the foot of the cliff, only visible as a small dot from the shoreline. Was that about Skansbukta? I'm not sure. Hey, Bob. Mike Scotting. Seeing issues with coming towards the glacier from the anchorage, accentuated by the other guy being more interested in hunting king eider than listening to his radio. Yep, there's it's definitely, when working in polar bear country, we've all got to be pretty switched on and looking all the time, as I was saying before, and thinking all the time. You need to be always thinking, if a bear shows up, what do we do about it right now? So if it showed up over there, what do we do about it right now? Well, what if it shows up over there? And then that situation is probably going to change in half an hour because people are in different places. So this is why it's a very active role, even for people scattered around the outside of a perimeter, to be constantly thinking, where could a bear be hiding from me now? And what would I do about it if it showed up? Message from Brian, cabin in Skansbukta was destroyed this winter by a bear. Well, there you go, bears in Skansbukta. Oh yeah, so message from Graham here. So it's important that all ELs communicate with each other where you've seen bears, and also high value habitat items. So knowing there's a dead whale somewhere, for example, to a degree, a lot of us are paying attention to that anyway, because we're thinking, oh, there might be bears that we could see. But of course, it's really important to know there might be bears that might sneak up on us as well. So maybe landing with a dead walrus is a risky thing to do. And as Graham says, pointless if only some ELs are in the comms line. So it's so important for us all to talk to each other. ICO is great for this because straight away it puts a lot of us on the same email list and we can help each other out. But especially in the Arctic, not all guides are on that ICO IATO list. And so that's worth bearing in mind. It's always useful to be talking to anyone you run into on the radio. And I try to call most ships that I see when I'm expedition leader. So I think I've probably met quite a few of the people saying hi on this list, I think. Hey, Augustine, we've never met before. Thanks, Marcelo. Let's see. So from Doug, yes, so speak to dropping visibility, or what are the limits when you abandon an operation? It's a good question because from a pure expedition leader point of view, not thinking about risk to bears, it's so hard to cancel an operation. All the guests are out and exciting and you're already pulling it in again. But I think probably it's all about thinking, what are the consequences if a bear arrives? Do you get to a point where if a bear showed up now, at the first point I would see it, it would be too late to do something about it before that bear was with us. So it might be with dropping visibility, you could start by reducing the size of your perimeter or starting to break people up into guided groups and keeping them close to the shoreline with zodiacs close by so you can do something about it. And then once you get to the point where you can't do anything about it quickly, then that's the point where you've just got to completely cancel it as well. And there's an element of experience to being able to see dropping visibility and be able to say, oh, this will blow through in 20 minutes. I'm going to take a risk and keep going. Or this is probably going to keep dropping. Let's get out of here now before it gets really bad and then start risking a bear's life. Message from Kat. Hey, Kat. A good point is having good communication and forward-thinking bridge. We had an evacuation in 14th of July last year. The captain immediately dropped extra Zodiacs with crew drivers to pick up guests while the expedition team drivers were busy returning guests back to the boat, essentially double the speed of evacuation. So yes, your crew are really important as well. So in that Magdalena Fjord example I gave, it was the captain in that situation happened to be looking at the right time and saw those bears first and told us that the bears were around. And working on that same ship as Kat, I had an evacuation this summer at New London. and I asked for more boats, and I was sending drivers back as soon as I was able to get them into those boats to be picking up guests quickly. And I was really surprised at how quickly those drivers were coming back driving boats. And what had happened was the ship had just lowered everything, had rafted those boats, and had sent out rafts of 3-4 boats at a time, each with one crew driver. And so as my staff were being sent back, they were being met halfway back to the ship by rafts of boats that they could jump straight into. So that was really good. So having everyone on the same page is really good. And from Neil, hey Neil, what expectation is there that the bridge is keeping an eye out? Is that a given, or do you not factor that into your scout party / line of sight, etc.? I would not have any expectation that a bridge would do that on most of the ships I've worked on. That said, I've had it a few times that the bridge has found a bear while we've been ashore, or has found a bear for us when we've been out looking for bears, wanting to see them in the ice. So they can be really effective, but I wouldn't factor it in as something that is definitely happening, because they have so many other duties, and it's going to depend on which watchkeeper is actually up on watch at the time. So, I mean, even if it's something that the captain is saying, we are doing this, we can't expect them to make it their sole job in the way it is ours. Oh, yeah, message from Heidi. She was the one watching that sleeping bear on Kvitoya. I remember Heidi was really, really sick that day as well. Doug, and losing the views of hillsides behind the landing. Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. So sometimes as the cloud height comes down, you're not in fog, but it starts to shroud the hillsides. And while it's less likely that a bear is up a hill, it could be up a hill. So when you start to lose the views of the hillsides, that might be a time where you start to think we shouldn't be here, because if a bear is asleep up there, then it could come down that hill and then you and the bear are in trouble. Hi, Annalena. So Annalena was the expedition leader for the landing we did at Kvitoya. She was the leader of the group who are really keen to see the Andre campsite. And we actually found a glove there, which I heard recently is thought to have been from the original Andre expedition, which was really exciting. Message here from Mario. Hey, Mario. Mario's very experienced in Svalbard, has been working as an expedition leader there now. He says, important also to scout from the bridge before the operation and on the way to shore, depending on place and conditions. So, yes, absolutely, Mario. It's really important to be looking from the bridge. I was once starting an operation at Fipsoya, and those of you who know Isbukta, close to the hut, will know there's a very big beach berm there. And from the ship, there was something really suspicious looking lying behind the beach berm. So we sent out a scout Zodiac. Tom Smith took out the scout Zodiac. I was watching from the ship. And when Tom got there, he could see nothing. Meanwhile, I could see that suspicious object stand up and start to walk around. It was a bear, but Tom still couldn't see it. He was probably within 10 meters of that bear, and he couldn't see it. It was amazing. But we could see it from the ship. So yeah, scouting from the ship's really important. And that's also a really good time to be looking at the landing overview with your chief scout, with your firearms master, with walk leaders as well, to talk about what we're seeing, what the pre-landing scout will involve, and what you're actually going to do on the operation. Okay, well, I think I got to the end of the comments there. So the only other thing I wanted to say before I finish up, because I've been talking for nearly an hour now, is a reminder that the last in this series is on Monday, and that is going to be Shelley Larson, who's just commented. Hey, Shelley. And she's going to be talking on leading in an evolving industry. And that's going to be at 0800 UTC on Monday. So I hope to see lots of you there as well. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.